This recording was made August 13, 1940, with then 23-year-old John F. Kennedy Jr. Long before his assassination, his presidency, and before PT 109, Kennedy was a patient at Mayo Clinic and author of a book, Why England Slept, detailing Britain's mistakes in underestimating Hitler and the German war machine. JFK had just graduated from Harvard and was still a ways away from joining the U.S. Navy.
At this time, we're indeed pleased to have with us in our studios Mr. John F. Kennedy, son of Ambassador and Mrs. Joseph P. Kennedy, who is in our city visiting Dr. and Mrs. Paul O'Leary. Mr. Kennedy is the author of the recently published book, Why England Slept. But before we ask any questions about this publication, which is just completely sold out its first edition, I would like to read from Henry R. Luce, the editor of Time, Life, and Fortune magazine. John F. Kennedy is the son of the American ambassador to the court of St. James. He spent some time in London and Paris embassies. He's recently out of Harvard and hasn't yet reached his middle 20s. Yet he has written a book of such painstaking scholarship, such mature understanding and fair-mindedness, and of such penetrating and timely conclusions that it is a notable textbook for our times. And with that, we want you too, of the radio audience, to meet Mr. John F. Kennedy, who is known to his friends as Jack Kennedy. But first, before we get into questions about this much-discussed book, I'd like to ask a few questions about how our guest has spent some of his 23 years. Tell me, Mr. Kennedy, where did you go to school?
Well, I attended Harvard. I just finished there this June.
And what are you studying at the present time?
Well, I studied international relations there, and I plan to go on to law school the next 3 years and study law at Yale University.
And may I ask, what are your plans for the future?
Well, I don't know exactly yet. I'm interested more or less in working sometime in my life for the government, but I haven't really decided as yet.
Well, that's very interesting. And now a few questions that bear on the subject about which you wrote in your book, Why England Slept. What is the book about? That, I think, would be the most appropriate question to ask you first. What is this book about, Mr. Kennedy?
Well, this book is an attempt to analyze the reasons for Britain's failure to rearm. It is perfectly evident to us now that they should have rearmed, but I've attempted to try to explain the reasons as they developed in England from around 1934-35 was the reason for their failing to rearm in the face of a rearming Germany.
Well, now, a question that frequently is asked in this country is, how did the Germans ever get the jump on the British? Why didn't the British know what they were doing?
Well, the truth is that Germany got a head start before the Allies grasped what she was about. It's not so much by the manufacture of actual implements of war as by laying a foundation for their manufacture. The German locomotive industry, for example, was assigned to the manufacture of tanks instead of rolling stock to the deteriorating German railways. Germany was shrewd in getting tooled up for aircraft production. It is apparent from the discussion that has been going on in America in the last 2 months that tools are the real bottleneck of aircraft production. They cannot be turned out in mass quantities, and they must be made by skilled workmen. Germany got the jump principally by getting everything ready for a large-scale output rather than by the actual output itself. There was considerable talk in Germany about a new cheap car that would make an automobile available for everyone in the Reich, but it was almost impossible to discover whether an automobile plant was being tooled to produce engines for the people's car or to produce engines for planes. When Germany, therefore, decided to start turning out planes by mass production, their task was easy. Britain, on the other hand, having judged Germany's future potentialities by her previous production, was caught completely unprepared. She had to go through the preliminary tooling-up period, which cost her nearly 2 years. And this handicap she's never been able to regain.
But all the parties in this country are pledged to rearmament. Now, I wonder, is there any particular lesson that carries a lesson to us in this, an election year?
Yes, I would say there was. In 1935, England also had its election year, and it was held in November like ours. At that time, the English leaders were becoming extremely concerned about German rearmament. But the British people were strongly pacifistic. None of them wanted arms. They felt that arms would be a step towards war. In order to win the election, not one of Britain's 3 major parties came out for rearmament. The result was British rearmament was postponed from the end of 1934 to the beginning of 1936, and this was fatal, because this was the great year that Germany got her real start on Britain. In 1936, Baldwin, in trying to explain why he had not started on rearmament sooner, said, I quote, "I cannot think of anything that would have made the loss of the election, from my point of view, more certain," end of quote. No American politician must be able to say that in 1941 about the people in this country.
Well, from your study and observations, are there any particular lessons that you believe can apply to us?
Yes, I should think there was. In the first place, since May, Britain has made extraordinary steps in rearming. Tank production has doubled. Ammunition production in some cases has quadrupled. The reason for this is that every group in England now has been willing to sacrifice its group interest to the national interest. Labor, capital, the people, and the government. However, before May of 1940, they didn't, and it had a fatal result. The point is that unless the American people are willing to make their sacrifices now that England has made when the menace appeared overwhelming and when it was obvious they had to make them, unless we are willing to do so now, we can't build up rearmament. For the simple reason that it takes 3 and 4 years to do it. If the people of this country wait until Hitler appears overwhelming, then they won't have rearmament. We must realize that we must always keep our armaments equal to our commitment. We must realize that any bluff will be called. We cannot tell anyone to keep out of our hemisphere unless our armaments and the people behind these armaments are prepared to back up the command even to the ultimate point of going to war. If we had not been surrounded by oceans 3,000 and 5,000 miles wide, we ourselves might be caving in at some Munich of the Western world. To say that democracy has been awakened by the events of the last few weeks is not enough. Any person will awaken when the house is burning down. What we need is an armed guard that will wake up when the fire first starts, or better yet, one that will not permit a fire to start at all. It's the system that functions in the pinches that survives.
Well, thank you, Mr. Kennedy, and having read a synopsis of your book, Why England Slept, and having read the tributes paid to it by Henry R. Lewis of the Life, Time, and Fortune magazines, I would think that perhaps there would be a future for you in that field. I wonder, as a parting question, do you plan to write another book?
Well, as a matter of fact, I think I'm done.
And so again, I want to thank you very much for appearing on our program tonight. We've enjoyed having you.
Thank you very much. I enjoyed it very much myself.